Thank you, Humphrey, and thank you, Dr. General Engman, and also Dr. Puri. Thank you for your speeches and discussion. Also, thank you for involvement in peace building yourselves. It's very interesting to hear you, to listen to you. It's a challenging to comment, of course, on Europe's role for peace on the Korean Peninsula when we're deeply involved in war, and when the recent summit in Pyongyang openly brings North Korea into confrontation with Europe through Ukraine. But as a peace organization, we naturally look for silver lining, and let me share a few thoughts and perspectives, as UPF, which originates from Korea, has given much of its resources and energy to promote peace and reconciliation on the peninsula, as some of you know. It's significant that the Korean War was the first military conflict of the Cold War, where many young Europeans shed blood for freedom and democracy, but their mission was only accomplished in the South. And today, with the resurgence of war, with two blocs, the divided Korea comes again to the fore. On June 19, a few days ago, the DPRK and Russia signed a new defense pact with broad political, military, and economic consequences. According to some analysts, and I was listening to US-based Russian scholar Vitaly Kozyrev, who recently shared his analysis on the Pyongyang summit. The pact is a win-win agreement between both nations. It gave more power to the DPRK as a stakeholder in a new Eurasian security architecture, but also China is seeing its own benefit in the agreement. In this context, Europeans are challenged to strengthen and coordinate their own security plans, both in the western and eastern margins of Eurasia. Therefore, a rapprochement is taking shape between the Euro-Atlantic axis and the Indo-Pacific theater of operations. The prospects for peace and reunification on the Korean Peninsula, as you mentioned also, are perhaps at their lowest level, but maybe we should look beyond the war toward the future. Earlier this year, Kim Jong-un broke radically with his father and grandfather's legacy by announcing that the DPRK would no longer focus on Korean reunification and consider South Korea as an enemy. But I doubt that his ultimate goal is permanent separation between North and South. One British specialist on North Korea, Dr. Glyn Ford, suggested that North Korea had nothing but the nuclear power to challenge South Korea. In a collective book published last year titled Beyond the Armistice, Efforts for Peace on the Korean Peninsula, Ford, who's had a long-time connection with North Korean officials, writes that a former vice chairman of the DPRK Politburo, Ri Soo-young, repeatedly stated that North Koreans know well that their economy is 40 to 50 times smaller than that of South Korea, and that if the Americans would let them off the hook of sanctions, they could grow their economy by 10 to 15% a year, and in 20 to 25 years' time, they would be at least on a par with Seoul, and then they could talk about unification. From this viewpoint, Kim Jong-un may be taking advantage of the war to gain support from Russia and others as well in that group, with a longer-term goal to catch up on economic and social development. I worked with UPF in Russia for several years, and when we promoted the project of a tunnel at the Bering Strait, which is one of the founding projects of our organization, I learned that the Russians under President Putin were making huge plans for the development of Far East Russia. Viewed from the east, Russia and the United States are only 80 miles apart at the Bering Strait, and a railroad connection at the Bering Strait would give Russia a very significant economic leverage. Although they are now caught up with the war in Ukraine, which they initiated, I believe Russians know that the future of Russia's development lies in the East. Russian scholars have repeatedly told us in our webinars, we had many of those webinars, maybe you know, that Russia favors peace on the Korean Peninsula and supports reunification, which would serve well their own development interests. They hint, for instance, at a railway link and common electricity grids across the peninsula and so on. In his biography, our founder, Dr. Moon, who was originally himself from North Korea, wrote that the Korean peninsula must play the role of a ball bearing in a machine, that is, maintain an axle around which the neighboring superpowers, China, Russia, Japan, and the United States, would not collide with each other, but instead cooperate closely for the sake of prosperity and peace in the region, in the world. That, of course, would imply a unified Korean peninsula, which has been for decades a priority for our organization. This may not be working at this time, and this may sound like a dream, but the huge potential of a prosperous, interactive Northeast Asian economic zone cannot escape the minds of leaders in the region. For the moment, European leaders are concerned, and with good reason, about the short-term implications of the current conflict and the expansion of a security architecture across Eurasia. For the long run, however, and that was said today, Europe needs to look ahead and contribute to a future cooperation between North and South Korea. Today, as Dr. Puri mentioned, many young Europeans have become familiar with South Korea through the Korean wave. They are drawn by thousands to study the Korean language and culture and look for job opportunities in South Korea. Just as an example, I talked with one professor of Korean language and culture in the University of Aix-en-Provence in the south of France. He told me that every year they have 2,000 applicants for 200 places. So this is the dimension of, the people interested about Korean language and culture. So, and of course, that makes it very different from 70 years ago when Korea was totally unknown to Europeans. So should we not expect and encourage that they contribute to peace and reconciliation on the peninsula? Of course, they're limited right now to South Korea, but they learn about Korean culture. And so in a sense, I believe that in this time of conflict, like General Engman said, Europe needs to coordinate security policies toward North Korea, naturally. But at the same time, I believe that European soft power may open new paths, particularly with North Korea. Thank you very much.